fans? It's your boy Luke here for another Jock Market preview. Here we got our December 4th cash market IPO targets. We're going to cover 6 of the best players I believe you should be buying stock in for tonight. Whether it's an injury situation, a good matchup, these players are going under the radar. It should give you guys some good EV going forward. So with that being said, let's hop right into it with our first target for tonight. Real quickly before we hop into it, just want to go over my portfolio from last night to give you guys an idea of the actual strategy I implemented, how I reacted to some of the pricing and some of the news that came out. Because here with my portfolio, you can see I reacted heavily to that Timberwolves news. I anticipated that Karl-Anthony Towns was not going to be playing. About 10 minutes before the IPO period closed, there were a couple beat writers talking about how Cat looked a little bit sluggish, looked like he wasn't really giving it his all and shoot around, that kind of thing, particularly in warm-ups when he was testing it out. So for me, I immediately tried to prioritize getting as many of those Timberwolves as possible. I had bids in on Naz Reid, obviously D'Angelo Russell that you see there, but I put a huge stance on Jared Vanderbilt. That's because even if Cat were to have played, Vanderbilt still would have started and been in a very good position to score well. And if Cat ended up sitting, it was in an absolute smash spot. The fact that he ended up just in the mid-20s in terms of his return, he could have very easily finished in the top 10. In fact, for most of the night, at least through 3/4 of that game, he was in the top 5 of the rankings. I was very tempted to go and cash out. I wanted to go ahead and ride it though. He had a little bit of a disappointing Q4, but obviously still led us to a very profitable night. So for me, I guess the moral of the story here is react to news, anticipate news, especially if you're getting anticipating news, especially like sentiment from beat reporters, that kind of thing. There is a lot to take advantage of there. So that is what we ended up doing last night. And going forward, we're going to go over my portfolio, talking over some of the mistakes that I made, some of the good moves that I made. A major mistake from last night was Evan Mobley, who's actually somebody who I had 5 shares of to start the night, bought more at halftime, ended up doubling down on my mistake. He was somebody who played plenty of minutes in the first half, just wasn't very efficient, and that inefficiency did continue through the second half. I'd probably do it again in hindsight. He was somebody who does actually score at a 1.1 fantasy point per minute type basis, so he's usually relatively efficient, just wasn't last night, and you're going to get burned every once in a while. Obviously, our good plays last night more than made up for it, but definitely was a mistake from my part. The first guy on our list is a massive wildcard in DeMarcus Cousins, coming in as the 83rd ranked player in the pre-IPO rankings. I definitely think he's being a little bit slept on. He's somebody who should be starting for the Bucks tonight, even though it'll be his first ever usage with the team, because Giannis is sidelined. Somebody who's already doubtful at this point, not even on the cash market rankings. So if we take a look at Cousins' game, would definitely fill the void left by Giannis. They need a big man over the middle, whether it's for the rebounding or clearing up some of those offensive boards and scores. So for me, DeMarcus Cousins, he's not going to take many shots for this team. He's not going to come in and immediately do what he was doing for the Rockets last year in a lot of makeup games when he was playing for the starters that were injured. He was very good assisting over there, was contributing in terms of points, 3-pointers, and rebounds. I don't expect him to be quite that full tool player this time around. I expect him to be a little bit more reserved, probably pick his spots rather than dictate that offense. But if you get him for less than $1.70, he's an absolute steal. If he goes out there and surprises the world, shows what he did last year with the Rockets, he could go for 35 or 40 fantasy points. Would not surprise me at all. This guy's going to rack up a ton of rebounds. We know that for sure. It's just really whether he asserts himself on the offensive side, whether he's out there taking shots, assisting the ball like we've seen from time to time. He has a ton of upside in this scenario, and truthfully, I think a relatively high floor as well. So as of right now, we don't have the word whether he's going to be playing as of tonight. We'll get word closer to 8 p.m. We have a much later lock tonight than usual. So we'll definitely know whether he's playing or not before lock. So make sure to pay attention to that news. But if he does, he's an absolute steal way down the board. Next up, we have D'Anthony Melton, who's going to get a ton of usage with Ja Morant out of the lineup. We haven't really seen that since Ja's been sidelined. That's why he's pre-ranked there at number 79. But truthfully, this is somebody who averages right around a fantasy point per minute. Should be seeing right around 33 to 35 minutes tonight. And for me, that means that his projection is way off. He's definitely somebody who's going to chuck the ball, so he's going to have his fair share of misses, which isn't ideal for the jock market. But even with that type of a penalty with those missed shots, still projecting for well over 25 fantasy points. I actually had him in my first run closer to 31 fantasy points. Had to nerf that down to right around 25 just to take a little bit more of a conservative approach. But even at that type of value is going to be a huge upside play for tonight. The matchup against the Mavericks is also one of the best on the slate, coming in as the third highest over-under. The Mavericks haven't been very good on the defensive side of the ball, particularly without Porzingis in the lineup, and he is expected to miss tonight. And obviously Melton, because Morant is out of the lineup, should see an increase in his usage. So even though we haven't seen it since he's already been out, we have a very large sample size of Melton absolutely going off with Morant out in the past. So that's what I'm going to be relying on for tonight. Next up, we have Duncan Robinson there at number 4, also being a little bit disrespected, especially because we know Jimmy Butler and Bam are not going to be playing tonight. Tyler Hero also hasn't really looked like himself, and you saw it last night. They really relied on Duncan Robinson shooting. They were giving him tons of three-point looks, made a ton of them as well. Was one of the better fantasy points per minute type of plays last night. So for me, Duncan Robinson is somebody I'm going back to. I have him closer to a 25.5 point projection, making him excellent value at the $2.50 point target price. The matchup against the Bucks isn't ideal, but they're without Giannis. This means that it's going to be a much more competitive game, and if the Heat are going to keep this competitive, it's likely going to be because Duncan Robinson's shooting lights out. They can't depend on Lowry to go out and get them 30 real points every single night like they saw last night. They can't really depend on Tyler Hero not shooting the ball well as well. So they need a lot of a turnaround to really compete tonight. So Duncan Robinson's somebody that I'm taking some shares of. Next up, we have Jaren Jackson. He's also on that Memphis Grizzlies team. Good matchup against this Mavericks defense. What I really like about Jaren Jackson is he should see a huge increased usage with Morant out of the lineup. Jaren Jackson isn't really a high usage player. Really more of a 3-and-D type player, kind of sits in the corner, will slash from time to time. But really the bulk of that offense is through Dillon Brooks and John Morant. But now with Morant out of the offense, Brooks already takes an insane amount of shots. A lot of that usage is distributed to guys like Jaren Jackson Jr., DeAnthony Melton, Desmond Bane, rather than going to Brooks, who already has such a high usage rate. So for me, Jaren Jackson, he's just a good value there. I'm coming in pre-ranked at number 23. I have him ranked a lot closer to number 14. And if I can get him for less than $5.20, it's not only going to give me a relatively high floor, but this guy could go out and score 40, 50 fantasy points very easily, especially in this type of a game script, which makes him especially attractive. Next up, we have Chris Middleton, who's a beneficiary of this Giannis injury. So just like at DeMarcus Cousins, I expect a lot of that usage to get distributed not just to the center position, but also to a lot of the periphery options. Giannis just has such a high usage rate in that offense. They essentially have to change their entire playing style without Giannis in the lineup. So for me, Chris Middleton becomes a very attractive option. He's pre-ranked at number 17, but I have him closer to number 7 and a nearly a 38.5 point projection. Like we already mentioned before with Cousins, the Heat aren't an ideal matchup, but they're without Bam and Butler, which means that they're going to be a less efficient defensive team. A lot of those backups that they have are more shooting specialists than they are defenders. They love playing their starters a ton of minutes out there in Miami, and it makes sense. They have great starters. Their backups are more of shooting specialists. So you got to try to keep those starters on the court as much as possible. But without them in the mix due to injury, should see plenty of efficiency on the offensive side for these Bucks. So I like them there. I have them at a target price of $8.50. You might go for a little bit more than that. I'm actually going to give them a little bit of leeway. Probably willing to spend up to $9.25. But somebody who not only has a really high floor like a Jaren Jackson, but also an extremely high ceiling. But at number 1, our blue chip option for tonight, where we're going to be investing a lot of our money into shares, is going to be DeJounte Murray. He comes in as the 6th ranked player in the pre-ranking IPO, but I have him as the number 2 player in the slate, only trailing Luka Doncic. Doncic, obviously in that high total game, we talked about a little bit earlier. This Warriors versus Spurs matchup is number 1 on the slate in terms of over-under, actually projected for more points, even though the Warriors have been the best defensive team in the NBA to this point. So I'm not necessarily sure I agree with the over-under, but even if we nerf that down 3 or 4 points, where I actually would have that over-under, still one of the better games on the slate to target. DeJounte Murray has been an absolute usage monster for this team, whether it's putting up points, assists, rebounds, blocks, steal. He's doing everything for this team. In fact, over his last 10 games, He scored over 50 fantasy points on DraftKings in 8 of those 10 games, which is ridiculous. Obviously, on the jock market, scoring tends to be a little bit lower. You get some of those negative points for missed shots. But DeJounte Murray, because he's a slasher, not really somebody who's going to put up a ton of three-pointers or anything like that, doesn't get a huge negative in terms of the shots missed. So I like him there at $12.25. I am willing to invest quite a bit into Murray. He's also somebody I'm looking to get 10 plus shares of. He's an extremely high floor play, potentially could end up the #1 scorer on tonight's slate, would not surprise me at all. So definitely somebody that I am planting my flag in. That is all I've got for the jock market preview. Go ahead and let me know down in the comments who you have as your favorite stock to target. Obviously, you guys just saw a bunch of my options, but I always love to hear from you guys, so make sure to go ahead and leave that down below. And as always, really appreciate you guys stopping by and enjoying the content. We're going to have even more NBA content coming throughout the week. On Sunday morning, we aren't going to have a cash market preview. I tend to focus all of my attention on Sundays to football. I'm a huge NFL DFS player, so I'll be on that side of things doing live streams and whatnot. But throughout the week, during the actual weekdays, we're going to have a cash market preview every single day. So make sure to look forward to that. If you guys have any questions, you want my takes on any players for tonight, you can of course throw those down in the comments as well. But until next time, guys, good luck with all of your lineups tonight. Good luck with all of your bidding on the jock market, and let's win some cash.